Good morning. My name is Imad Harb. I am the Director of Research and Analysis at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Today, we hear of some changes in the trajectory and the substance of nuclear negotiations with Iran over its nuclear program. And these negotiations have actually been stalemated since last March, after there were some positive signs that maybe an agreement was in the offing, but apparently not. Today we are discussing that specific topic. Our guest is Barbara Slavin, who is the director of the Future of Iran Initiative and a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. She's also a lecturer of international affairs at George Washington University and the author of Bitter Friends, Bosom Enemies, love that title, Iran, the US, and the Twisted Path to Confrontation. She is a regular commentator on US foreign policy and Iran on NPR, PBS, and C-SPAN. Barbara, thank you very much for joining us today. And right off the bat, we see things happening. Joseph Borrell, the European Union, Joseph Borrell, visited Tehran and met with the foreign minister for 4 hours. Apparently, something is in the offing. Robert Malley and Ali Bakri, the Iranian nuclear negotiator, have arrived already in Doha, Qatar, which is hosting the negotiations that are mediated by the European Union. So, what is going on? Give us your take on that.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you very much for inviting me to speak. I always like to be optimistic. I'm doing my best to be optimistic, but this has been a very tough negotiation. And I think the Iranians still have a lot of reservations about returning to an agreement that may not outlast the Biden administration. Right. So they need a lot of persuading. They need a lot of coaxing. And the Europeans, of course, have been acting as intermediaries and doing a good job. But I think the introduction of one of Iran's most important neighbors is a very good sign. Now, in the past, Oman has sort of fulfilled that role. It has been a venue for back-channel talks between the United States and Iran. But this is not back-channel. This is announced. And of course, Qatar has been encouraging Iran to return to compliance with the agreement. I would bet that there are some economic sweeteners that are being discussed, right, yeah, that perhaps Qatar can provide to Iran that might function as a sort of guarantee that Iran will benefit from this agreement, because Iran has been insisting on a guarantee that it will, see tangible economic benefits from returning. So look, it's good that they're back. As you pointed out, the talks have been stalled since mid-March, and if anything is going to happen, now is a good time while there are still a couple of years left in the Biden administration. Correct. So we'll see.
I want to just comment a little bit on the Qatar situation. Can Qatar really act as an economic facilitator of sorts? Are we talking about maybe Qatar can take the harsh measures of sanctions off of Iran a little bit? I mean, can Qatar work in that kind of situation?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they share, Iran and Qatar share a major natural gas field. Right. Qatar has tremendous facilities for liquefying natural gas and then sending it on to places like Europe, which needs it very, very badly, right, because of Ukraine and the attempts to embargo Russian natural gas. Right. So, why not some sort of cooperative agreement? And the United States could pledge not to interfere, not to sanction, as long as Iran remains in compliance with the nuclear agreement. Something like that, certainly. Iran also has talked about building a pipeline to Oman. I mean, again, this administration in Iran is quote unquote conservative, but one of its tenets is improve relations with the neighbors. And so this is a perfect opportunity for the neighborhood to get together and provide incentives for Iran to roll back its nuclear program. Yeah,
I mean, the United States cannot stop Qatar from working with Iran on certain issues, especially if it facilitates the nuclear agreement, since Iran already has really truly open relations with the United Arab Emirates, and billions and tens of billions of dollars in commerce exchange. I wanted to talk a little bit about domestic considerations. What are the most important domestic considerations, considering how these things may turn out? What domestic considerations should they weigh? I mean, the Trump administration, the Biden administration, and the Raisi administration.
Yeah, well, from the Iranian point of view, Raisi does not want to be made to look a fool. He and his cohorts campaigned against the nuclear deal to a great extent, certainly criticized it while it was being negotiated. So he wants to look as though he's gotten something more than the Rouhani government would have gotten. This is important for his domestic prestige, which is not very high. Iran's economy is in a terrible condition. There have been lots of protests over high prices. Inflation is over 50%. Yeah. We complain in the West about 8%, but you can imagine 50%. So he needs this, but he doesn't want to look like he needs it. And I think that's especially true of the supreme leader, who, of course, is making the final decisions on all of this. On the US side, Biden, of course, has faced popularity issues. We have midterm elections coming up, and he does not want to look weak either. He doesn't want to look like he's bending over backwards to help Iran. Now, I think, again, the US population is very distracted now by a number of other issues, the latest one being this crazy abortion ruling from our Supreme Court. And I think this is a perfect time for Biden, in the middle of the summer to revive this agreement. It'll have an immediate positive effect on gas prices in this country and could help him actually in the midterms, particularly if he can say that he did not really compromise, that essentially Iran agreed to come back to the agreement according to terms that had been negotiated, by mid-March. So I see a lot of positives on both sides, but they have to massage the narrative so that they both look tough and like they haven't bowed to pressure. This is very important, especially for the Iranians, I think.
Can President Biden really circumvent the pressures from Congress? How can he manage that pressure?
Yes, he can. Under the legislation that was passed in 2015, you need a 2/3 majority in both houses of Congress to block this nuclear agreement, or this revived nuclear agreement from coming back into force. And although the Republicans have been solidly against it, and some Democrats, there is not a 2/3 majority in the House and Senate to block this. So I think, there'll be a public debate. Obviously, there always is. But one thing we've seen over the last 4 years now is that there is no good alternative to the JCPOA. It just leads to escalation and misery and sanctions. So I think the Biden administration has a good argument to make.
They do have, both sides have good arguments to make. Biden administration definitely has a big fight on its hand, but like you said, yeah, it can maneuver a little bit. So can Raisi. But that issue with the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, do you really think that the Iranians are going to forget about it, or what?
No, I don't think they'll forget about it, and they don't have to forget about it. I mean, frankly, if this deal can be revived, the United States and Iran should sit down together and start discussing other issues. And of course, the US will be back in the deal, can sit in the same room with the Iranians at meetings of the Joint Commission, which monitors the agreement. So it'll be up to Iran if it wants to press that issue. Then the US will have requests of its own that are outside the boundaries of the existing JCPOA.
Right. As we know, regional pressures are really humongous, are very, very big, and especially the Israeli one. The Gulfies, Saudi Arabia is apparently they're going back into direct talks with the Iranians, but the Israelis are really quite adamant about this. So how is that to be managed, considering that the Israelis have really, there is no government, nobody really knows who's running things or how things will be run, although Israel will always have that little something of Israel will never have a nuclear weapon.
Iran will never have a nuclear weapon. Israel has plenty of nuclear weapons.
Well, yeah, Israel has 200 and above that, and more than that. How is that going to be managed?
Yeah, again, I think the timing is perfect because the Israeli government is going to be led by a caretaker. They're having elections in the fall. And so, Bibi Netanyahu will, scream and yell and hold his breath till his face turns blue, but he can't stop this. And in fact, there's a lot of debate in Israel. A lot of members of the security establishment support a return to the JCPOA.
They supported the 2015 agreement.
They support, a lot of them, yes, and support it then, and more even support it now, because they've seen that without Iran in compliance, Iran is, at breakout point, frankly, has enough enriched uranium to make a bomb. So it has not served Israeli interests. It has not served Arab interests. It has not served American interests to have no agreement with Iran on this issue. And we have less visibility now. The Iranians have turned off cameras that the IAEA had installed. So, the longer this goes on, the less we know about what they're up to. It really is in the interests of everyone to put this back into place. So again, it's summer. You know what happens in the summer. People think about other things. Let's get it done.
Yeah, I honestly don't see why there shouldn't be an agreement or a return to the old agreement. But then again, politicians think differently, especially Israeli politicians. The country is going more rightward, and the Israelis are desperate to really make themselves look even more tough on Iran in that specific situation. I want to talk a little bit about the UAE and Saudi Arabia. How are they going to manage not only the new round, but the general idea of, okay, what if the Biden administration does strike this deal?
Yeah, well, I think they have mixed views. Look, on the one hand, they don't want Iran getting nuclear weapons.
Correct.
They don't want instability in the region with attacks on shipping and oil facilities, as we saw back in 2019.
Correct.
But, they also don't like to see Iran get richer, because they know that some of that money is going to make its way into the hands of Hezbollah and the Houthis and militias in Iraq and so on. But, they're having bilateral talks. The UAE and Iran certainly have had many agreements. And now the Saudis and the Iranians have been talking as well. And they should really reach an agreement to not interfere in each other's internal affairs. This is something I think that would be very useful. They can also have broader discussions about nonproliferation. There's been some discussion about a nuclear weapons-free Persian Gulf. We can't get a WMD-free Middle East because of Israel, but we might be able to get a WMD-free zone in the Persian Gulf, and that, I think, would be a good step. There are a lot of provisions in the JCPOA that can be regionalized. This might put pressure on Israel to eventually come clean about its own nuclear arsenal, which I think is about 90 warheads, according to the Swedish Institute for Peace Research. Not 200, but it's still a lot. Yeah.
Well, these days, one is as big as 90. So yeah. I want to just also touch on the other actors in these negotiations. Russia, China, Germany, France, the UK. These people are the original signers of the 2015 agreement, and how much influence will they have? Do they have much wiggle room here, or are they just too busy with their own affairs?
No, they do have influence, and the European Union in particular, because it's their envoys, particularly Enrique Mora, who's been going back and forth to Tehran and trying to get seal this. The Chinese, of course, are Iran's biggest trading partner. And so I think they can argue to the Iranians that their trading relations will only get better if sanctions are lifted. Right now, Iran is selling a lot of oil to China, going around the sanctions, but it would be easier for Chinese companies of all sorts to work in Iran if sanctions are lifted. The Russians, I think, are ambivalent. On the one hand, I think they like having Iran suffer because they're under sanctions now. So they have, misery loves company, as we say. But on the other hand, they will be able to expand their nuclear work in Iran, civilian nuclear work in Iran. They'll benefit from that. There's a carve out for that in the JCPOA. I don't know how much trade, frankly, goes on between Iran and Russia anyway, perhaps not that much. This is one area where the Russians have been constructive in the past. And, one day the war in Ukraine will end and Russia will still want to be seen as, a member of the P5 and an important guarantor of agreements like this. So I think they made an effort in March to try to get some extra benefits from the deal, which failed. I think they would go along with it. They certainly wouldn't stop it if the Iranians make the decision to go ahead.
What, in your opinion, how much? Not necessarily how much in numbers, but how likely is it that an agreement will truly actually impact the international oil market?
I think it will have a very beneficial effect. I think we'll see oil go below $100 a barrel for sure, because Iran can add another 1 million barrels of oil a day very easily to the about 1 million that it's selling now, circumventing sanctions. Maybe more. I've seen that it might be able to go up to 1.5 million barrels additional. I forget what its OPEC quota is, but it's certainly well below that right now. Right. So it will be very helpful. And if you put that together with all the other measures that are being taken to try to lower the price of oil and so on, it certainly will be good. And I think the French president, Emmanuel Macron, made some comments to that effect that we could certainly use. He said both Iranian and Venezuelan oil back on the market.
Yeah, but this is it's so tricky, honestly, because it's you're asking Iran to help with the international market, but yet at the same time you have such severe sanctions on Iran not to participate in this international.
Well, with the JCPOA revived, those sanctions are
exactly lifted. This is the thing. All these are positive things that would support a return to the JCPOA. And this is where politics comes in. I mean, why do American politicians still do not want to go back to that thing? I mean, obviously, we're talking about domestic considerations here in the United States. I want to ask you a little bit about, expand a little bit on what possible agreements could happen between Iran and Saudi Arabia, considering their mutual concerns about different things, and especially Saudi concerns about Iranian interference in the region.
Well, I think the Iranians, they're already supporting this ceasefire in Yemen. They could promise not to provide more armaments to the Houthis.
Are they?
Particularly drones and rockets, which have been used to attack Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. Right. They could promise not to agitate among the Shia in the eastern province of Saudi Arabia. Saudis could promise to cut back or eliminate their support for a group called the Mujahideen Halq, the MEK, which is widely believed to get Saudi funding and is obviously a major irritant to the Iranians. There have also been reports of Saudi meddling in Khuzestan province, which has an ethnic Arab population, and in Baluchistan, which has a Sunni population. Right. As I said, a non-intervention, a non-subversion pact would be very welcome, I think, on both sides. It's, in the past, there have been these agreements between Iran and Saudi Arabia. There were when King Abdullah was on the scene in the 90s, and there could be again.
Yeah, the Saudis appear to be, Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman just made a regional tour trying to basically make friends, so to speak. But the friends are there already anyway. But what is he trying to do? Is he trying to really rally the troops, so to speak, or trying to just show himself off as this regional leader who can do this and that and the other thing? All this reflects on what happens between Saudi Arabia and Iran later.
Yeah, I think MBS is trying to turn the page from a very, very ugly series of incidents. We'll see if he's successful, but the blockade of Qatar, the treatment of his own people, which has been extremely rough, the hideous murder of Jamal Khashoggi,
the war in Yemen,
the war in Yemen. Yes, I mean, it goes on. The list of his misdeeds and atrocities is very long. Right. But no one has figured a way to prevent him from becoming king yet. So he is a fact on the ground, a very large fact on the ground.
Right. Yeah.
And we'll see what comes out of this meeting that's scheduled. I'm dreading, frankly, Biden's handshake with this man. I wish it didn't happen, but
this was going to be my next question. I mean,
the
president is going there.
I knew Jamal Khashoggi for a long time. Many of us did in Washington. Yeah. What happened to him should not happen to any human being, and so it will be a very difficult moment. I have to be honest with you, but I understand the need to, there are reports now that the Saudis won't pump more oil. I worry about Biden being humiliated, frankly, by MBS if he goes and meets him and then the Saudis don't increase their oil production. That would be a real blow.
That will be really very bad for Biden's reputation. But the idea of him going there and still maintaining that I'm not going to be meeting with him. I'm meeting with regional leaders. I mean, come on. I mean, you're sitting with him at the same table. So, but then again, that's political calculation. I guess the president and the Democratic Party has made before the midterm elections. I think we're fine with time now. We have used our time, and thank you very much, Barbara. I really appreciate it, your explanation on these issues. Thank you for joining us, and this is an ongoing thing. And thank you all for joining us today. And we see you in other interviews and other functions at Arab Center, Washington, D.C. Thanks very much.
Thank you.